Okay. So just right at the end of yesterday, I wanted to speak something out. We learned that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Chumash and he wrote Sefer Bilam. The Ritva explains that there was actually a Sefer Bilam, and the story of Bilam that we have in Parshas Balak. So there was actually a Sefer Bilam that was the story of Bilam in much long version, and what we have is just an abridged version, and that's the Sefer Bilam that we're talking about. Okay, so we have over here Yirmiyah Kosaf Sifroi. He wrote his own Sefer, which is Yirmiyah. The Sefer Malachim, the Kinnis, which is Eicha, and Chizkiah and his people. Tosfos says, although Chizkiah didn't write it himself, he was the one who caused them to have written it. So it caused them Chizkiah Siyosai, Kosva Yeshaya, Mishli, Shirashirim, Klehelas, and Anshe Knesset Doila, Kosvai. Rashi says that's referring to Chagai, Schaya, Malachi, Zerubbabel, and Mordechai, and that crowd. They wrote.
As he just backing up for a minute, he said that Bilam's account is an abridged version. Every account in the Torah is an abridged version. It's filled in by the Medrash, and there's all sorts of information missing in every story.
So I guess there was a sefer that had more information that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote.
I saw a shot, I think, in the notes that the brachas or the Bilam's brachas were not maybe in the original or something.
Bilam's brachas were not in
brachas, or his intended klolos turned into brachas. That part was the poetic part.
Uh-huh. But that is in the Torah.
Yeah. So the poetic part was added into the Torah somehow.
So Sefer Bilam,
it still doesn't make sense, but that's the pshat that was offered.
Okay, geweldig. Okay, Zog Gemara weiter. So they wrote Yecheskel and Trey Aser, Daniel, Megillas Esther, and Megillas Esther. Ezra Kosov Sifroi, he wrote his sefer, the Yachas Shel Divrei Yomim Adloi. Rashi learns he wrote about the yichus of different people in Trey Aser until he got up to him. He couldn't write after him. Nisayalei l'Rav, Domer of Yidom Rav, l'Ola Ezra miBavel Acha Yiches Atzmai V'Ola. It's a riot to Rav that first Ezra wrote about his yiches and then he went up there to show. Uman Askein, who finished Trey Asor, Nechemia ben Chachal. Amar Yeshua Kosov Sifroi, he wrote his sefer Ushmoina Psukim Shabbatayah, and the last 8 psukim of the Torah. Tanya. We have a brisa. Command Amar Shemaine Psukim Shabbatayah Yeshua Kosvan. We have a brisa that says, in fact, the same halacha that Yeshua wrote them, because it is a machlokes. The Tanya we learned by Yom Hashem Moshe Eved Hashem. After Moshe Meis v'Chasav by Yom Hashem Moshe, how could he have written it if he was no longer alive? Ella Atkan Chasav Moshe, he can't be the Chasav Yoshu. That's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Lei, Amar Lei Rabbi Nechemia. Amar Lei, they told him, Amar Lei Rabbi Shimon said, how's that possible? Evshir Sefer Torah, Chaser Ois Achas. Is it possible that Moshe Sefer Torah was missing 8 psukim? Ksivit says, Hashem told Moshe, L'koyach es Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. So Moshe took the whole Torah. Ella, it must be Moshe wrote everything. Ella Atkan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer U'Moshe Omer V'Kosev. There's a shaila if we're various Omer. So up until that pasuk, Moshe repeated what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, and he wrote it down. Mikan ve'elech HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer, u'Moshe kosev, Moshe didn't repeat it. He just wrote it, bedema, with in tears or with tears. The problem is that even if that's the case, how could Moshe have written something that wasn't true? What he wrote because he was crying, or he wrote it with tears. That's the reason why he could write something that's not true, that didn't happen yet. So there's a famous marsha on this Gemara that many people mistake what it means, because the marsha says something to the effect that if it is not written down, if it's written down and not spoken, so the rest of the Torah, it was Moshe Omer v'Kosev. Here Moshe just wrote it out. If it's written down, then you could write a sheker, and that's about not true. You're not allowed to say a sheker with your mouth, but you're also not allowed to communicate a sheker with a letter. So the pshat of the Marsha is it was written differently. The ksav was different. It was written in tears. There was an indication that there's a difference between what Moshe had written until that point and what he wrote after that point. And Vibalt, there was a distinction. It was not inappropriate that he wrote it things even though it didn't happen yet. Okay. Mekan ve'elech HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer u'Moshe kosev b'dem. K'moshe namar, like I said in the pasuk alone, further on, v'yomer lehem, Baruch was the sefer of Yirmiyah, mipiv yikar Eli, skol advarim Eli, you'll say to me, v'ani kosev al sefer b'diyai, and I will write it, record it on a sefer with ink. Zoktamar kaman azla, hadam Rabbi Yeshua bar Abba, Amar Gidol Amar Rab, shmoine psukim shevetayra, yochid kaira Eison. What yochid kaira Eison is the subject of is a very big machlokes. Rashi learns that yochid kaira Eison means ein mafsikin bahen. You're not allowed to be mafsik in those 8 psukim. You can't stop there for an aliyah. Those 8 psukim have to be read straight. That's how Rashi learns. The Rambam learns what it means yochid kaira Eison. It means you don't need a minion. He reads it like it's puzzle shot. You don't need a minion. The Ravid is magia on the Rambam. Where in the world did you get such an idea that you don't need a minion for these 8 psukim? The Yerushalmi agrees to Rashi's pshat that it means you're not supposed to stop in the middle. So how could you say that you don't have a minion? And then he adds another cute point. The Ravid says, I don't understand. Up until now, you had a minion. What happens suddenly now that there's no minion? So I could answer that question quite easily. It's Chos and Torah, obviously, right? So I know what happened. Everyone packed out to go to Kiddush. That's what has to happen. But that's the Ravid asked. Where did the minion go? Until then, you had a minion. Zog to Gemara. Lema. Let's say that it's like Reb Shimon. It's not like Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon was the one who said that Moshe wrote it. So if Moshe wrote it, why should there be any distinction in halacha? The fact that there's a distinction in the halacha between those psukim and these psukim must be because it was written differently. So Gemara. So Reb Shimon said, after Secretary Chasar Isachas, so he said it was written differently. The Gemara, Filu, Tamer Reb Shimon, you can even say it's going like Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon was one. Forget the other sheet that held Yeshua wrote it, not Moshe. So it's written by Yeshua. Maybe it has a different halacha. But if Moshe wrote the whole thing, why should there be a different status? So tomorrow, however, Ishtanu. Lamai said there was a change in the way it was written, and that's enough of a reason why there should be a difference in halacha between the rest of the Torah and those last 8 psukim. Zok to Gemara weiter. Yeshua Kasav Sifra. Yeshua wrote Yeshua. Gemara Vaksiv Layamas Yeshua Benun Ever Hashem. Zok to Gemara the Askei Elazar Kohen finished it. fact, Gemara Vaksiv Elazar ben Aaron Mace. So how could he have finished it? So Gemara the Aske Pinchas was Pinchas finished. Right? I Vaksiv Shmuel Mace. So Gemara the Aske God HaChoyze V'Nos Nanovi, who were prominently featured in Sefer Shmuel. David Kos of Sefer Tehillim. Ayidei Asar. That's what the Gemara said earlier. For the Gemara, it should have said Ayidei 11 Zaken. Because V'lachshiv Nami Esan Nozrachi. Why isn't Esan Nozrachi mentioned? Because in Tehillim it says Lamatech Leisen Nozrachi. So how come he's not mentioned as an additional contributor to the Tehillim? Amarav Esan Nozrachi Zehu Avram. That's Avram Avinu, who was listed already. Ksiv Hacha Esan Hazrachi. Uksiv Hasam Mi Heir Mi Mizrach Tzedek, which is referring to Avram who came from the Mizrach. In fact, the Gemara, Kachashav Moshe, Vikachashav Haman. There are two people in the list that the Gemara mentioned earlier, Moshe Rabbeinu and Haman. The problem is, the Amarav Haman Zeh Moshe. Haman was Moshe. Ksivacha Haman, Uksivasam, V'chol Beisi, Nemandu, Milosha Nemanos. And for the Gemara, Trey Haman Hava, there were two Hamans. One was Moshe, one was a different person. Moshe cost of Sifroi, Uparshus Bilaim, V'Eiv. So Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Eiv. If Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Eiv, it must be that Eiv lived in the period of time where Moshe Rabbeinu was. Misayei Levi Bar Lachma, Damar Levi Bar Lachma, Eiv B'mei Moshe Haya. Eiv was in the days of Moshe. That's going to be a very big discussion. We're going to have many more shittas today of when Eiv lived, and the life of Eiv will be elaborated upon in Daf Tezayin on next time. Tzavacha mi yitain ephai is words said in words that were said in Eiv. V'yichavin milai. Tzavasim uvamei yimada ephai. That's what it says by Avram Avinu. So that's what it says. I'm sorry. That's what it says by Moshe. Maybe it was B'mei Yitzchak. V'chsiv mi ephai hu hatzat sayid. This was by the brachas. So maybe the ephai indicates that Eiv was concurrent with Yitzchak. B'mei Yaakov, or maybe it was Yaakov's times. V'chsiv im kein ephai zois asu, which was when he was sending the children out to Mitzrayim to buy food from Yosef. V'hema b'mei Yosef, or maybe it was b'mei Yosef. V'chsiv ephahim right. Zoktam Elois lakadai. The ephai must be referring to Moshe. T'chsev miyitain b'sefer v'yuchaku. U'Moshe hu the ikri mechoyke. Moshe was called the mechoyke. T'chsev hayar reishes loi kisham chelkas mechoyke ksofan in Vizachapra. Rav Amar Iyoi b'mei Meraglim. He was in the days of the Meraglim. Again, the Meraglim was also b'mei Moshe, but I guess it's a little later because Moshe started earlier. Ksiv hacha ish haya be'eretz utz Iyoi v'shemoy. Uchsefasam hayesh ba'etz. Practically more, how could you compare utz to eitz? Midami hacha utz hasam eitz. Dr. Mohachi kamal l'moishel Yisrael. Yeshnoi la'oisei adam. Is there that person? Sheshnois of aruchos pe'etz. It's referring to a person who lived long like a tree. We're soon going to see that Eiv lived 200 years. Who making al eitz, and he is making on his door like wood is. So it's referring to the door. It's referring to the Meraglim, not because of a similarity utzeis. It's because we're talking about somebody who was making al dairoi ke'etz, and that's referring to Yisrael. Yosef Ahumar Rabban and Kamed Rav Shmuel Bar Nechemeni. The Yosef v'Kamar Aichinish Eiv lo'haya v'lenivra. That's a famous cliche. Eiv never existed. Elamashal. The whole Eiv is merely a mashal. Amar lei. So Shmuel Bar Nachmani told him, Alecha Amar Kra, because of people like you who will misunderstand what the Torah is talking about. Amar Kra, Ish Haya ve'eretz utz Eiv Shemoy. So clearly it's telling us where he lived. It's obviously talking about a real person. In fact, Gemara, Elamayata Ularosh Ein Koil Kim Kivsa Achas Katana Asher Kana V'Yichya. This was when the Navi came to give Musa to David over the story of Bathsheba. So it's talking about this person. Mihava, who was that person? Avada, it wasn't a real person. Ela Moshe Ba'alma. So Hachanami Moshe Ba'alma. So we can say that Eov is also a Moshe. It's not something that really happened. Frank the Gemara. Im Kain Shmoi B'Shem Iroi Lama. Why would I need that it should say his name and the name of his city, which it does by Eov, and not by the Moshe that the Navi gave? It must be that Eov was a real person. Eov was in the Golas of Bavel, and he came back with Ezra back to Eretz Yisrael. And you know what? He even had a little bit of medrash. Ubeis midrashai b'Tveria, and his base medrash was actually in Tveria. So they asked, and this is very mud the like, is he from all over the place? If he had a base medrash in Tveria, like maybe people would know about it. How you talking? So there are those who say that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar were also saying that Eov was only a Moshe. And what they meant was Rabbi Yochanan was a Yid who had horrible tzaras. He lost his children. Remember, he used to go around saying Dain Gromad Asira beer, and he lost his money. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar both had very difficult lives. And Rabbi Yochanan had a besmedrash in Tveria. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Oh, we have our own Eov. We have our own Eov." And he has a besmedrash in Tveria, and he's referring to himself. Ich bin shenoich an Eov, because I also suffer terribly. Zok Lamar Mesa. You may shenoich of Shal Eov. The days of the life of how old did he live? We said earlier he lived so long like a tree. It's the age of when Klal Yisrael went into Mitzrayim, but Achiyotzu. So doesn't that tell us that he lived at that period of time and not during any other period? And for the Gemara turning on Talmud Beis, we'll have to stop because it's getting late. Ema Kim Mesha Shenichnu Yisrael Mitzrayim Yachashiyotzu. Doesn't literally mean that Eov lived in that period of time. It means he lived for the same amount of time, which Rashi tells us is 210 years. Eov lived a very long time. He lived for 210 years. Okay, it's 5 to 7, so we have to stop here. I'm so terribly sorry. Usually Chaim Fear calls me by 7:05, or even if Victor calls me by 7:05, by 6:05. I mean, I'm not up, so I feel very, very bad. And I'm sure we'll have to catch up. We have a big blot tomorrow. These are jam-packed letter, but we'll have I'll have to catch up. Okay, once again, I apologize for sleeping in. Good.
Yeah, I needed some.